this is Teresa. I am a UX principal, and thank you for joining my session. We're going to talk about creating clear and impactful diagrams. And I just wanted to give a note about what audiences might benefit from this the most, so you can see if this is the right session for you. I would say if you are a junior designer or new to design, then this would be a perfect course for you. Most of the people that have attended this course previously and really enjoyed it were also engineers, both front and back end engineers, product managers, also people in finance and other disciplines that deal with numbers a lot, data scientists, executive assistants, and people in school, and basically anyone who's making diagrams a lot for their work or schooling, but who doesn't have advanced experience in design. So with that, let's dive in. I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. So for the last 6 years, I've been working in ad tech at Integral Ad Science. We actually have an amazing UX team of about 11 folks, and we're hiring, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And we work with many of the world's top brands and probably your company. And we do a lot of great work around keeping ads brand safe. And I've been in UX and design for over 20 years now. All of that time I've focused on really large data sets and data design, also some visual design. I did project management for about 8 years, where I was the project manager, UX researcher, UX designer, visual designer on many multiple projects at the same time. I don't recommend that, but I learned a lot. And I was even an account manager for 1 year. So I have a really good sense of what project and account managers need from the business as well. And the coolest project I ever worked on was I'm based in New York City, but at the time I was in Boston, and we were bidding on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website build. And I actually won the bid, and I was in charge of helping to win the bid and, for the team. And so it was really super exciting project. And you can go to the site and see it now. And my most recent hobby is during COVID, I got really into collecting vintage, like mid-century modern glassware. So like this is some of the glassware that I collect. And it's been like really nice, beautiful respite to look at these things during a couple tricky years. So with that, we're going to dive in. So first, of course, I'm going to give an introduction to some of the topics we're going to cover. And then I am going to give 6 broader tips about the kinds of things that you want to take into account before you start your diagram. And then we're going to take a look at a case study diagram that I worked with a product intern on last year. And we're going to use that as an example and just sort of show how that evolved and how we improved it over time. And then I'm going to give 8 broad tips for really like refining and tweaking the usability in ways. And again, you don't need any special apps to do this. You can just use Google Slides or PowerPoint, whatever slide program you use or something equivalent. And I did want to add, even though I say there's 6 tips and 8 tips, it's really many, many more than that. There's dozens and dozens of tips. So being a UX designer, I don't want you to have to sit there and scroll all these out. And I know it's not going to be convenient to look at this presentation later. So I did make you guys like a really handy checklist with just all the tips in it. I just ask at the end of the session or whenever you get a chance, if you could just fill out this like survey, letting me know how you like the session and what your role is. That would really help me tailor it and hopefully bring it to more people. And I'm not collecting your name or email address. I'm not selling anything. So if you could just fill that out, then you can immediately download the PDF of the checklist. So, with that, just between us, have you experienced this problem at a job or at school where you were shown an important diagram, but it was so confusing or cluttered that you couldn't easily understand it or use it for whatever you need to use it for? And, I think if we're answering honestly, most of us would say, yes, I've seen many of those and maybe even like designed one or two of those difficult to understand diagrams, myself included. So, this is a real problem that we all run into. And why is that tricky? And why do we run into that problem a lot? Because diagramming is easy. There's so many programs out there that let, everybody just go and make a diagram and in a way that's good. But, making a diagram that's useful and easy for people to understand and use is a little bit harder, can be a little bit more tricky if you haven't had someone teach you some of the tricks around that. And so that's what like I would like to do today is sort of bring these tricks and techniques that we use every day and teach you guys some of these things that you can use to make your stuff easier to use. It isn't magic, like don't tell anyone, but it's not that magical once you know what they are. So I'm going to use the terms useful and diagrams a lot today, but I mean really specific things when I say that. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page and we're talking about the same thing. And UX designers do that a lot. So for this session, when I'm talking about diagrams, you might have a really specific mental model of what a diagram is. But really what I mean is any kind of visual document or image that you create to help other people understand a process, a problem, data points like in a chart or an idea. Usually it's sort of compact. You can see the whole thing at once. It's not a series of wireframes or mocks, but just one image that you can sort of look at and absorb and understand something. And so common ones that we see all the time are flow charts, swim lane diagrams. And if you don't know what that is, the example we're going to look at today is actually a combination of a flow chart and a swim lane diagram. Data charts, of course, very common, line bar and so forth. Timelines, a lot of people in product, engineers, and other folks are making timelines to convey the sense of a project or something else that they're working on, especially to leadership. So it's important that those are really clear. And then if you don't do this stuff as much, maybe you're leaning more just on things like a table or a matrix. So, Matrix is not just a cool movie, right? A matrix just is a fancy word for a table that instead of having just columns and rows, maybe has a couple levels of columns or a couple levels of rows and just is a little bit more involved. So for today, we're going to focus on using flowcharts and swim lanes as our example, but the vast majority of ideas and tips that I'm giving you guys can be applied to really any kind of diagram. But I did just want to say, like, we're not, going to talk specifically about nuances of data charts, for example, in this particular talk. So, what makes something useful? Let's talk about that. So, when people think about something being useful, they think about usability, they think about the ability to easily interpret the diagram. Like, what the heck is this? What am I looking at? Do I understand it? Obviously, a huge important part of making something useful, but there's actually a lot of different aspects to a diagram that can make it useful or not useful. And these are the kinds of things that UX designers pay attention to. So if your audience believes it's relevant to their needs, so you can have a diagram that is clear, but if you haven't made the point that you need to make to your intended audience and you haven't made it relevant to them so they understand, why they should care about it or how they can use it, then it may not end up being useful to them, even though some of your underlying data is correct. Also, people need to trust the quality of the content or the data. So this is everything from, is the information accurate, to, is it, spell checked? Is the data right? Does it look right? And so when they see it, does it feel like it's a quality product? And they're also going to find it useful if they can use it to learn something, right? So you may need to, maybe you're in HR and you need to disseminate information that you need other people that in the staff to learn. Or if you're an engineer, maybe you need to complete a task and understand what all the pages of a new website are going to be. Or maybe you need to help someone else understand something. And so this is another thing that can contribute to something being useful or not. And lastly, if people know how to find and maintain it over time, that also contributes to making it useful. If people wonder, is this the latest version? Is there a newer? Like, if I need to use this as a reference, but is this the latest and greatest version? Who do I go to have it updated? If they can't do these things, it becomes less useful. So all these things together contribute to the usability, and you want to think about all of them at least a little bit. So useful diagrams are going to be more powerful because when you deliver that right message to the right person in the right way, this is going to help get your project understood and valued by colleagues or management who need to use it. It could help something get prioritized by leadership because now they get that message of why this project is so important. It can help if you're working with an engineer. It can help if you're the engineer. It can help you ensure that you know what you're building. And if you're the UX designer or the product manager, you can make sure that you're all talking about the same thing and it's built as intended and in scope. Many, many, many times I found, a situation where I come in after a project has started, and this is wherever I've worked, and, there might be like a little bit of a disconnect between what product, the stakeholders and the engineers have planned because they've only talked about it at a high level. But once you have a diagram and people can really look at it and tear it apart, that's when you see there might be disconnects that you can really clear up for everyone. And then it can also help if you make a useful diagram, it can help your idea be like appreciated by a current or prospective customer. So they really get like, oh, this is the thing that we're going to build, this is the thing that we're going to do. And they really get that, maybe it's a sales pitch and they really get the message of what you're trying to get across. So we're going to start with this case study, like super fast background. We had a product intern. He was awesome. It was last year. We asked him to create a diagram of the customer journey for this new tool we had actually already started kind of working towards and building out a little bit. And this type of diagram, it's typically going to show, if you don't know what a customer journey is, it just shows the steps the customer would experience from when they onboard and start using this tool till they set up and like add all their admin information and then they report on it. We're actually not going to look at the content of this flowchart at all. So don't worry if you don't know what that is, or you don't have to start reading all the individual boxes and what's there. And then typically a UX designer would create this deliverable, right? Like if you have one, we want to take that burden off of product and off of the engineers and do that for them. But I wanted to see how the intern would solve it from scratch, especially since they were coming from product. And this is something they would probably have to do a lot in their life. So I wanted to just see how he approached it. And then after the first version, would come in and let him know like how I would normally start it and how we could improve it from then on. So the next screen is going to show the intern's version 1. We had a meeting prior to this, probably half an hour. We just kind of talked broadly about the project and he sort of knew about it from other meetings he had attended. So I want you to take a look and think about which areas or boxes you look at first and second. So where does your eye go first? So I'll let you look at that for a sec. Okay, so let me talk about the areas that people usually mention, and hopefully this resonates with you. So usually what people say is, well, their eye was drawn to these blocks of color over here. So these are the headers for these swim lanes that go across. and tell us if the project was happening offline in Salesforce, which is like our tool where we store all the information about our customers, or the admin user interface, which was the main thing that we were building. And a lot of people are drawn there, of course, because there's color. Sometimes people mention this yellow box. They're not always quite sure why it was yellow, if it was yellow because it's the first box or something else, but there's no legend, so it's hard to know. And then also this area, which is in the middle, but also is different because it encloses two boxes. So a lot of people mention that. The fuzzy areas are just, like I just fuzzed out for privacy, but again, you don't really have to read the words because we're not going to talk about that as much today, except for in a broad sense. So those were the kinds of areas that people's eye were normally drawn to. And, that's what I would expect from this diagram. And I'll say, there were a few things in here in the first version that he did that worked really well. So let me say what they are. Um, One thing he did was he before he started, he asked me, "Do you have a draft of this?" And we didn't, but I did have bullets that kind of, we had talked about in a previous meeting before he came on. So I gave him that. So he had some sense of some of the words to use and where to start. And like I said, the developers had also started building a couple of those pages. So he kind of went and clicked around in those, but they hadn't built out the whole thing yet. So he didn't really have the whole context. Um, Another thing he did right is, and again, I didn't tell him this, but this is a customer journey. So automatically that kind of gets this idea of a path or a flow in your head. So he made a flow diagram, which is perfect because it has a start and a natural start and end to it and a flow to it. And then the other thing he did that was really cool and that I really appreciated was that he put this these swim lanes behind it. And this is a really good way to sort of layer on a second level of information. So the first level is literally that path that you take, and the second level is where do these things exist in the world, like they're offline, or where do they happen in an interface or offline. And so I love that he did that as swim lanes, because the other way that a lot of people tend to communicate some layer of information like that is through different shaped boxes, right? So instead of seeing just rectangles, you might see if there are three swim lanes, maybe do rectangles and then circles and then diamonds or triangles. And the thing that's tricky about that is it does require more of like legend. It just requires more work from the user than this kind of layout does. And so I like that he chose this approach. There's definitely a lot of things that I would change about it. And those are the kinds of things we're going to talk about. But I do want to say, like, this gets the job done. And a lot of times you just need to get the job done. But we knew that there were things that he had to fix. And there were other things that if I was the UX designer, that I would want to fix to help increase the usability. And it's really just not about prettiness. And I really wanted to get that across. You're going to see how important making it is to make it more useful. So, sorry, one other thing I want to mention is we did know that we were going to show this to not only the product manager and all the engineers, but then also the chief product officer, because this was a super important project. And so we knew that lots of people would see it, maybe even other C-levels. So we really wanted to make sure it looked its best. So I want to talk now about the kinds of things that you would do towards the beginning when you're starting off your diagram. So this is going to be for new diagrams that you probably haven't done, that you haven't started yet. So first you want to figure out your diagram's goals. And this could be something, the things I'm going to say on the slide, it's like if you might spend 5 minutes doing it and you're going to get way, way better results than if you don't do this. Sometimes you do this kind of stuff instinctively, but you want to think about what the purpose of the diagram is. So persuade leadership, inform engineers, educate employees, impress the clients of the board. You'll notice these have like there's a verb, and then there's an audience, right? So what do you want? This is kind of the why are you doing it? Why are you bothering to do this work? There's got to be a reason that you have to teach or inform, one or more groups of people. So who are those people and what are you trying to do with this? And that will help you know also like to what extent you want to tweak it out and spend time on it. And besides that why, you want to think about the story or the takeaway that you want to communicate. So, for example, this is the message you want people to come away with. And it could be something like, this project should be prioritized, or this idea is going to bring in a lot of revenue, or the program, may need more funding and there's a problem. Or in the case of our example, it's going to be the last one. This project encourages customer self service, right? So you want to figure out what kinds of messages. Usually, there's at least one really major message you want to get across. It's going to help you make other good decisions along the way. So these are really priority to think about first. And again, just could be a couple minutes. And then you want to think about if you want your audience to take a specific action after looking at your diagram, is it clear what they should do next? Especially if it's something like you need funding, or you want your boss to like reprioritize this. Think about what is the action you want them to take next. Now, it might not be in the diagram. You might be presenting kind of your whole case in a short or long deck, and so maybe that closing of the loop happens later in the presentation. That's fine. But now that you've decided, hey, this is what the purpose of this is, make sure you close that loop and provide that information so they can take that next step. Second thing I want to talk about in this beginning section is making sure you're advocating for your audience's needs. So of course in UX, we're big on audience. But you want to think about, what does your intended audience need from this deliverable so they can be successful? And again, this is related to the previous screen, but just make sure, if you have a leader who's going to look at it, what literally content or way of looking at it would they need? What would engineer need? Ideally, you are not making 2, 3 versions of the program, but you're making one flexible version of the diagram that is going to hit the needs of a couple different audiences. And then speak up if you think a different deliverable or companion deliverable would be more useful in meeting the needs of your audience. So a really quick example, one time last year, someone from another department came to me with a very dense 5-page Word document that was basically a bunch of bulleted checklists that 5 different teams would need to take action on pretty regularly, like almost every day. But it was in one long document, and they, each team only needed a portion of that. And when the stakeholder came to me, asked me to make a diagram. But after talking to him and having him cut down the content even more, like hadn't even really started mocking up. And I said, this is not going to fit in a diagram. And once we did all this kind of stuff I'm talking about, we decided, the best thing is actually a series of 5 small checklists so that each team could focus on their list on a single slide, but they could look at the other checklists if they wanted to or whatever, but they could really focus on their own section really easily and efficiently. And that's what we did. So don't worry to present something a little bit different than what the stakeholder comes to you with if you think it's going to better meet the needs of the project. Okay, now another thing I want you to think about is this long-term maintenance. So again, this can be quick, but is it going to be used short-term? Is this a diagram that's going to be used for a few days and never looked at again? Or more usually, it's a long-term deliverable. And this could mean either it's a flow like the one we're going to look at that over several months, it could get updated 4, 5, 6 times as the project changes and the requirements change. Or it could be something, from HR or another department that you update quarterly or yearly. And so you want to just kind of take that into account when you make some of the other decisions you're going to make. So who is going to own it and where is it going to be stored. You need a clear owner for the document, at least to start with. You might be the person making it, but who's going to own it after you're kind of done, those first couple initial versions and it's ready to pass on to someone else. You don't want to have multiple versions laying around. So we never email files anymore. What we're doing is sharing a document and giving either view rights or editing rights to other people as appropriate. So there is only one version of the document that exists. And sorry, just to say, if you really might revisit an old version of it, then maybe it's a deck and you have slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. So you have version 1, 2, and 3 in case you go back to version 2. But make it clear which is the latest, put a slash through the older versions or something like that. So you have access to the older versions, but you're only, they're all together in one file. And the other thing is, even though I'm a UX designer, I've been working in Photoshop for more than 20 years, Figma, Sketch, like I can draw in any program I want, Illustrator. I'm not going to do that the vast majority of the time for a diagram. I want to make sure that the stakeholder or other people who are going to be the ones who are more likely to update it can update their own document. If I had to update just me, every document that I was asked to create in the last 6 years, I would be working 24 hours a day, right? So I want to give that power and that autonomy to the stakeholder once I have a nice, really solid version for them to work from. So, and that also helps them, like, some small aspect of it changes, they could just open it, make the change. It's not going to get out of date so much so quickly. Couple more things. Make sure that you're going to start with a really solid version 1 draft. So, we talked about how you want to make sure that you're getting the content from people who really understand the needs of the project and the diagram. If you are that person, make sure that you sit down with the person creating it, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour, whatever they need to have a good first stab at that content. Otherwise, they're really just going to be wasting their time, and your version 1 to your version 2 is going to be so different, may even take a whole different form. It's like better to start with the right content to begin with. And then make sure everyone's talking the same language. And by that, I mean, like, we're in ad tech. There's literally certain words that are used in ad tech that are really familiar to leadership, that are familiar to our customers. And we want to make sure that we're using like the right words that will resonate with people. And it could also just be, the words could be like the names of the products at your company and the official names, like the ones that marketing uses, not like the funny nickname you use for your project, once upon a time, because you want to make sure you're using the official names, but also, like, you don't want to keep ingraining like the wrong names for things for across your staff and across your company. It just makes things more confusing. Like, use the proper name as much as possible. And then quick thing, but ask the stakeholder, like, do they already have an existing diagram or drawing or idea? Like, what did the old version look like? Or have you drawn something? Sometimes they won't give it to you because, they've done it and then they literally won't show it to you because they might be afraid of like their drawing skills or something. But, really, sometimes it can be helpful to set expectations. You may or may not use um, what they've given you, but at least ask them to show it to you so you can start with that if you think it's appropriate. The last couple things I want to say about beginning, when you think about what deliverable type is best, like I said, if you do all this other stuff before goals, audience, content, maintenance, then it's going to be so much easier to figure out what style of diagram is literally going to be best. If you need a little help, I do link to these 2 articles, and if you fill out that survey at the end, you can get them. But I just want to show you, like, this one gives ideas for what kind of data chart to use. And then this one's really cool because it gives ideas on what kind of diagram style to use. So I found these really helpful. Hopefully you will as well. And the other thing I want to say is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are diagrams that we all know and love. They're super flexible. They're easy to create. They're easy to understand. These are the ones you should lean on. Don't worry if they're like it's boring to make a pie or a donut or something like that. Because when you do stuff like a gauge chart, spider, box plot, these are charts sometimes like if it's appropriate for your audience, if your audience is scientists, if your audience is other folks who really, really know and actually understand those kind of diagrams, and those are better if a histogram is the proper um, data chart to be using for your data, great. But for the vast majority of you, the vast majority of the time, you want to use these more common ones, flowchart, swim, checklist, so forth, Venn, because this is going to really resonate with people. They won't have to think about like understanding your diagram. They're gonna focus on the content, which is what you want. The last thing I want to mention is to try to be really respectful of the company branding and privacy. So, how this relates to diagrams is, usually your marketing team or your designers will have some kind of like starter PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever docs that you can use that already have the colors in them. So, you can just grab the colors. They can tell you what the fonts are. If you don't feel comfortable installing or using like the proper font, ask them how to do it. If you really can't still, then just, use something that's really like a really clean sans serif, like Arial or one of those Tacoma. Um, but the color is where people are really going to notice if, we've all seen these decks where you're looking at this big presentation and then all of a sudden in the middle of it is some chart that somebody made from some other department and threw into this really important presentation, and maybe it doesn't have the best design, and maybe it's also just got like random colors. It really stands out, and then you're kind of focused on that a little bit, or maybe it's just me, but you're focused on how it looks different. Your customers will definitely notice this, and you don't want people to think that it was thrown in there at the last minute. You want them to focus on the content and not the styling, so at least getting those colors right is just going to help it not stand out in a bad way. And the last thing is like, another just small thing, but they all add up and people can underestimate. When you're making a diagram, it's meant to convey a piece of really important information. Often diagrams, because they're taking like big ideas and condensing it into a small space with very few words, you do not get it right the first time. And you have to go like 3, 4, 5 versions to get it right, maybe even more. And so you really don't want these versions floating around that are draft. Label it as draft, label it as, confidential or what have you until it's more final. So people don't start building it, acting on it, making decisions on it while it's still like actively really in flux and not figured out yet. I take a drink here. Water. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the case study. And here again, you're going to see like little bits of changes go really a long way. So here's the version 1 again of the intern's original diagram. We met and I gave him ideas for some content was actually missing. So we talked about the content that was missing and some other improvements that he can make. He went back and then made a version 2. And so I want you to notice, I'm going to show you the version 2. If there's anything that's like particularly confusing about this next diagram. So kind of take a look. You don't have to read the words, but just for like the layout, the color and styling, if you can focus on those things, see, what you think about the clarity of different elements on the page. Okay, so the kinds of things, so this was really interesting because one of the things I asked him to do was take that, he had that process layer, he had this second swim lane layer, and I asked him to find a way to add another layer of information, which would be who is either IAS and the customer or just the customer by themselves is like in charge of each of these steps and has control over the steps. Because when we started talking about like goals and audience and purpose and all of that, what came out was, wow, we really want leadership to understand that the cool thing about this project is that there's the ability for the customer to have a lot of self-service where they can really control and manage the website by themselves in the tool. And like all these boxes represent things the client can do on their own without us. And only these few first steps, which are really quick, do they need our help. And so I asked them to convey that in some way. And I also asked them to help convey, because there were a lot of boxes, like where it began and where it ended. So when he came back to me, this is what he had. And a couple things were tricky for me. So one is we still have a lot of colors going on. So we ended up adding this fourth swim lane because there was a box that we discovered was missing. And now there's four colors, but for starting and ending, he changed this yellow box to green and this one to red. Now, a couple things. Of course, green and red does not mean start and end in, all cultures. It doesn't necessarily convey that. But it was a good start, a pun, if you will, to that. But we do also see green and red elsewhere. So it wasn't quite there yet, but he got going in the right direction. Another thing that was tricky for me is the way that he wanted to convey the difference between all these boxes and these boxes was to use a different outline. So instead of filling, he decided to do the outline. And that was probably because he had already used fill colors here and fill there. So the tricky thing with that is it's really hard to tell the difference between, long dotted line and dot and dash and then like short dotted line, right? And in fact, it's so difficult that you can see he actually didn't I don't know if this was going to be his like final version too. He actually didn't can do it correctly. So this heavy line is not actually represented anywhere in the legend. And this dotted line with big fat space white spaces isn't also represented anywhere in the legend. So, that's how tricky it is to get it right. And it's hard for a user to quickly see the difference between kinds of dotted lines. So he went in the right direction, but it was just the style choice that he picked wasn't helping. And the last thing that was a little tricky for me was the way that and this is just coincidence, but the way that these legend items um, kind of line up coincidentally with customer lines up with this row and IS lines up with this second row. And, this box lines up with this third swim lane. So that was just something he did by accident. But because, that isn't labeled as a legend and isn't in the boxes look the same size as all the boxes, it almost looks like another part of the flow. It's not clear that those are legend items. And so, in trying to improve it, he actually added more confusion to it just because of the way he styled it. So that's why the styling is really important to learn and just think about. Um, so now I'm going to show you version 3. This is where we ended up. And I hope like even at first glance, it looks better than where we had, started together. And I say we because it's really like a team effort. And oops, sorry, I need to do that. What I want to show you is this next slide. So this really juxtaposes where he started, at the beginning with his version 1 and his fine. He's an intern, he's learning. This is not his expertise. He's learning to do product. And this is where we ended up. And I'm really excited about where this ended up. But this isn't so much. I think it's fair to say this isn't pretty because I'm a designer. This is prettier and easier to look at because we made usability changes. And I'm going to talk about the specific usability changes that we made that one by one, when you add them together, you have them also have the benefit of having a more attractive design. They really go hand in hand. So let's take a look at that. This covers what I just said. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these 8 areas, broad areas, and just some really specific things that you can do within each area. So first of all, we always want to start with the content and making sure the content is accurate. So this is one of the most important sentences I think in the presentation, which is you want to think about, is anything missing, unnecessary, or incorrect? So what do I mean by that? If you're looking about whether any of the content at first is missing. So yes, he had about 3 boxes of content roughly missing. Doesn't sound like much, but we don't have many boxes here. So it was actually quite important. And that could represent, it did represent literally weeks and weeks of work, that weren't represented on there. So if the developer is going to use this to give an estimate back to product, we got to get all those boxes in there. They are hugely important. And then also, was there anything unnecessary? In this case, I would say no, other than a lot of like um, extra colors and extra visual clutter. So in that way, it's unnecessary. And then anything was incorrect. Yes, some of the steps were like either in the wrong order or need other corrections that we got in there. Also, we were missing originally this whole swim lane. So we added that to reflect that we were not only building the admin system, but we're also building the reporting system where you would see all the data and all the numbers and the charts and the pretty visualizations and all that. Again, weeks and weeks and weeks of work. Can't, forget that step. Also want to think about other phrases, short and clear. When you have a diagram and it doesn't have many words on it, like all the words are important. So do little things, and this is stuff that you can do right from the beginning when you write it. So notice how I start them all out with a verb: confirm and set up, recruit, collect, create, verify, add bulk, run, whatever, enable. So, and then whatever you're doing, the noun that you're doing that with. And so that kind of just helps the person reading it read them more quickly if they were not written from that context. So really simple thing that you can do. And then think about the words and make sure they make sense for your target audiences. Some of the words he had used in here were jargon that isn't familiar to our customers, but he was an intern and he didn't know our customers. So then as the UX leader, then I correct him and say, oh, well, we actually, call it this in the industry or in our company, to make sure that we're using that. And again, to make sure that the developers get used to using that word. So we're all talking about the same thing. And then just, tenses, punctuation, stuff like that, normal, make sure you're hitting in something that's quality. So get your content right first, because if you add a lot of boxes or take away a lot of boxes or add in a swim lane, it could really change how things fit. Sorry, one other quick thing I want to say about this. Cut down busy diagrams or turn into 2. I can't tell you how many times I see a diagram that is so ridiculously huge. You literally can't, it will have 50, hundreds of boxes on it, and you have to continually zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out when you're looking at it. Completely unnecessary. I always do a diagram no bigger than the equivalent of like a legal size page. So, you can fuss around with your document size, but that is it. It should fit on a screen. If you can't fit it on a screen and read it, then it should be on multiple screens. Break it down. Make sure that you're using contrast purposefully. So by that, I mean, we want to draw attention to important items. You can vary the color, you can bold the font, change the line thickness, shape, but you want to do it with purpose and sparingly. Don't want to have a lot of garbage shadows and 3D elements. Definitely don't do that. You want to minimize distractions and extra colors. Only use it when needed. So, we ditch all these multicolors and instead say, all these things are headers. The headers to the swim lanes, they need to be one color. Now you can focus on how the words are different. Now you're not looking at the color difference. You're looking at offline Salesforce admin reporting. That's what's important. So think about what you want to stand out and help it stand out, and think about the other things you want to recede. So similarly here, what we did was we wanted to have this juxtaposition between the self-manage and the co-manage. So this language, it doesn't say here customer and versus customer and IS, it says co-manage, self-manage. Like we going back again to the goals, like just adding those little words in there and, letting this part recede because this is not as great. It's the co-managed part. And then this is the part that is the self-managed. So I want that to like pop out more. Um, Next, want to ensure that your metadata is legible. So title, author, date, you know, it's actually really important. Don't just like throw it up there in the corner. He had it very light gray and had it faded out. The title is important. It's supposed to be a summary of what the heck your whole diagram is about, right? So don't skimp on that. Also, the author, really important. Most people never put their name on a diagram. You should, because and not necessarily you, the creator, but the person who's responsible for updating it over time, put their name on it. So when someone, a month, a year from now wants to find this diagram, they know at least the department to go to and where to start looking for that diagram. And for the date, a lot of us have been taught in school, oh, just have the put it in there so the date will auto update. You're not going to have to forget to update it. Horrible, horrible thing to do for a diagram. And this is something that he just kind of done instinctively. But the reason why it's bad for a diagram is a diagram, remember, it is capturing like a moment in time, a thing, a stage, a process. And, let's say it is COVID. And, I am looking at an HR document and I am reading that HR document and looking at my benefits. If it says March 2022, or yeah, 2022, then I am going to think that it is taking COVID into account. It's been 2 years, but if someone in HR just opened it and that information happened to change, it can be really deceptive and cause a lot of problems. It could cause legal problems. So you want to manually always update the date on diagrams. Another thing, we talked early on about the takeaway, and you really want to make sure that you explicitly state the takeaway. Why? There's a lot going on here, and if you are a leader, then you may not care about the nuances of the what's in each box. That's really for other people to figure out and make sure is accurate. Maybe what you care about is the takeaway, which in this case, one of the takeaways is that the customers again can self-manage. And so if I am showing this to a leader, and again, we knew that we were going to show this to chief of product and possibly other leaders, I want them to notice, whoa, this is cool. This project is mostly something people can self-manage. But also, just by the way I laid it out with these two colors in this takeaway, I'm enabling that conversation to be more likely to happen where that leader does what leaders do and say, well, wait a minute, what about this other stuff? When is this other stuff going to become self-managed? Will it be ever? And, then product can say, oh, we're going to do that in the future. Like, I hope you'll fund it, what have you. You're really, now you see how you're enabling those conversations to happen more easily. Okay, 5 of 8. This is another detailed thing I want you to think about, this idea of how do we improve the accessibility and the clarity with some thoughtful details. So this is where, you go in, you spend 20 minutes and you've done like a few little things and it makes a big difference, right? So originally, remember, he had done this yellow for the start. And then it evolved where he did green and then red. Okay. Now, the tricky thing is, what I wanted to do instead was, draw focus to the start and end, but I need this box to be blue and I need this box to be white. So, we had started out with like a little rectangle box hanging off this that said start and a little rectangle here that said end. But, rectangles are steps and these aren't steps. This is just kind of helping you focus your eye where to begin reading and focus it where to end reading. And so what we did, and we ended up with like these really cool circles, which happen to also, emulate stoplights, which is kind of neat. But we use the word start and end. So there's no doubt that, we're not going to just use green circles or green and red. We're going to say start and end. And of course, this is also going to help people that have color blindness issues, or who are from cultures where green and red do not mean start and end. So, we're using the words to take away any doubt. And another little thing is, when you're in your drawing program and you make arrow, 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 and you make this arrow for the takeaway, it's going to give you an arrow that probably looks like all your other arrows. And, I didn't want it to look like the other arrows because it's not a step of the process. It's just kind of pointing out, hey, starting at this point in the diagram, this thing is happening. And so it looks different. It's blue. It's got a round ball at the end. It's curvy. It doesn't look like any of the other arrows. And that's also why this text is bigger and blue and isn't in a box. We don't want it to look like a step. We want someone to notice it's a different thing. Um, a couple more points I want to bring up is, and we mostly covered this, the idea of bringing in different layers of information. So he's got the process layer, he's got this swim lane layer, and then we added the color layer. But again, try to do it in a way that it is clear as possible. We were able to, in the second version, he had three legends with the dotted lines. And we kind of realized only one box is using one of those kinds of dotted lines. If we just reword it differently and think about it a little differently, we actually only needed two legend colors. So that was able to cut that down and make that simpler, which was great. Another thing you want to keep in mind, and this is something to do really towards the end because you're moving things around, no matter what kind of diagram you're doing, often you have to kind of move things around and reorganize things based on your content or other things that change. So you do want to think about, again, depends on what culture you come from. Here in the US, we're going to usually order content from left to right, especially if it's time focused, because when we convey time, we usually convey it here from left to right. But in another culture, you may go right to left, you may go up to down. So, think about your audience and what is going to make the most sense for them. And then also take advantage of those, features they have in all the programs in terms of things snapping to grid or aligning or distribution features so that you can select a bunch of boxes and then have them automatically line up, just so it just kind of looks neater. And, watch out again, it's like seconds to do this stuff, but watch out for these random elbow joints because whenever your eye sees something change or different, you're going to notice it. And you don't need to notice that. You want to remember things that aren't important, you want to recede. So you would just grab this box and just scoot it over to the right and grab this box here and scoot it over to the left so that those lines are straight and you don't, you're not noticing things you don't need to notice. And then here, we use a shaded box, which is a really cool and common way in a flow diagram to say hey, these things have some kind of relationship to each other. To do that, and again, we're not using that same black line again, but we're using this light fill. But it's not bright yellow. It's not that important. It's just we want people to know they go together. And then the last thing in the set of tips is to just watch out for anything that could be confusing. I'm not going to really go over this because we kind of talked about them before, but what you want to do is show it to other people. And then what I do is, I don't tell them anything about the chart or very, very little. And just say, tell me what you see. Tell me what this is. And then just see what they say. You would be very surprised, especially if you have an area you think that is bad or tricky. Do not point it out. See if they notice it. And if they don't notice it, say, what do you think this is? Maybe they can correctly describe what it is, but maybe not. So try to be a little loose about that and ask maybe, on your first or second draft. And then again, towards the end, you would be shocked at things that you think are super clear that really aren't necessarily clear. Let me take a sip. So much to tell you guys. Okay. So I love UX. But you don't have to be a UX expert to improve a diagram's clarity or impact. We got 3 slides left. What I wanted to say is I think there's 40 tips in here. It can be overwhelming, but you know what? don't worry about it. For new diagrams, like focus on those before you begin tips, goal, audience, all of that. Get a strong start. If you're doing a new diagram or some existing diagram that's like super critical and you really want to make it better, think about the beginning stuff and then just incorporate these detailed tips as you can. You want to improve the content, clarity, and the look. Focus on doing things incrementally until it becomes more natural to you. And so, maybe spend half an hour improving a diagram that you know is important. The great thing about UX skills is like they're really powerful. Just a little bit of improvement can really go a long way. We showed example after example after example of how changing one thing in a very slight way that could literally take, minutes could make things much, much clearer. So, but with that power, great power comes great responsibility, right? So you want to use that power for good. And what does that mean? These can help us directly improve our outcomes by avoiding misunderstandings. It can also help us by increasing revenue. So when we highlight positive or negative issues that need addressing and these deliverables are useful and clear, then people are more likely to be able to address those issues. When something is useful, then people are more likely to be able to improve how we can allocate staff or projects because now they really understand what's going on with the project or with the staffing, and you're able to convey that message better. And it also can help you sell important ideas to leadership or, of course, to your customers, because again, they really understand what you're trying to teach them. So go out, create a bunch of useful things. If you have befores and afters that you can share with me, I would love to see them. And again, you can get all these tips in a checklist. If you just would answer a few anonymous feedback survey questions, it's just like, what did you think of the session and what's your role? Then immediately after you submit it, you will get all the tips in this downloadable PDF. So I'm not collecting name or email. It's like a little confusing on the survey, but I'm not collecting that information. And you just go to bit.ly/impactful diagrams to fill out that survey. And also, as of right now, March 2022, our UX team is hiring multiple positions. We're hiring 2 senior UX designers. We're hiring also a UX designer summer intern who will probably mostly be working with myself. This is the really, user-friendly URL to type in, but if you have a moment and you could type this one in, I would appreciate it because that's my referral link to HR. So that will help them know that you came through me. And also you can follow me on LinkedIn. There's many, many Teresa Baileys, but if you type in Curious Teresa, then you will find me more easily. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining my session. And I really appreciate it. Bye.